Okay, and here we are once again, our 30th installment of our quest for truth. And I'd like to think we're getting closer, but sometimes perhaps we're even getting further away. But at least we're trying, and I think that's something in and of itself. And we're here with the Reverend David William Parry from the city of London in merry old England. And my name is John Barnwell, and I'm here in Detroit, Michigan, or as the original French city, Detroit, the Straits. And yes, we are definitely in the Straits at this point in time in many areas of the globe. And I see we got friends dropping in, and that's a good thing. And there's things that keep changing around us, and so I keep trying to keep up with the swirling activity. And forgive me for being a couple minutes late here. I never know how long it's going to take to do certain things. So anyways, last week we did a bit of an exploration into the distinctions that could be found between I shall and I must. And that kind of revealed some proclivities in our friend here who struggles with that concept, as do all of us, you know. But I have my coffee and I'm ready to delve. And I hope everybody has their beverage. So in any regard, at this point, with this tremendous winter activity going on in so many places, and I do put out a heartfelt prayer to all those people, especially in Texas, because they considered the EPA regulations more important than children freezing in cars and in parking towers and things of that nature. So it's got kind of crazy here in the States. But again, we're going to focus on antidotes, and hopefully we can be a homeopathic alternative to some of the dark clouds that loom over the free impulses of humanity. And if there's anything worth guarding, it's your freedom, because it's through freedom that you can bring into your life a distinction between I shall and I must. And it's that shall aspect of it that has to do with something that Rudolf Steiner had shared some time ago, and I think I have it here somewhere. No, it's not the first place I looked. Oh, I know where it is. Excuse me for a moment, and I will retrieve what I was planning on talking about, but I had already closed the window, because it seems to happen that I'll start talking and all of a sudden one of the screens I have open will start talking to me in echo or something that I'm not even involved in. Yes, here we go. I think I'm getting there. My computer's running a little slow today, unfortunately, but that's the way it is when you try to get things done. Yes. It's a quotation of Rudolf Steiner's from December 19th, 1920. He says, "By what means do our actions evolve to greater perfection? To use an invariably controversial expression, how do we achieve greater perfection in our actions? We achieve this by developing in ourselves the force which can only be designated by the words devotion to the outer world. The more our devotion to the outer world grows and intensifies, the more does this outer world stir us to action. But it is just through unfolding devotion to the outer world that we succeed in permeating our actions with thoughts. What in reality is devotion to the outer world? Devotion to the outer world, which pervades our actions with thoughts, is nothing else than love. And so that's Rudolf Steiner, putting it in such pristine clarity. And so, how are you, David? Reverend David? How are you doing there?
Very good question, John. Good afternoon to you. And everybody, good afternoon. Oh, God, word plays. I remember at university, the first time round, we've got one of those weird reverbs at the moment. I don't know where the reverb is coming from. So I'll just speak. Right. I think that, yeah, that's it. No, it's still there. It's still there.
Still there? Well,
Yeah.
Here, I'll just mute. Okay.
Oh God, a lovely, and it's still there. It's still there. The
Well,
reverb.
it's not me. So you must.
Gosh, I wonder what's happening there. Dan? I'll keep going, John, and try and sort it out in the interim.
If you have more than one device going where you are, that will be sufficient. Then just try knocking your listening volume down a little bit, because it's recycling in your own system. So just turn down your volume just a little bit.
Is that helping?
I don't hear an echo.
Right. It might be just something weird this end. It might be just something weird. Yeah. I remember as an undergraduate, a Callow undergraduate, although I went to university late, I mean, in those days, it wasn't the automatic rite of passage that it seems to be nowadays. I mean, people had to decide, should I go or not? And normally there was a reason why people did. I remember reading David Hume. You can't get an is from an ought. You can't get an is from an ought. And thinking, for God's sake, shut up, man. I read some of the atheists. If you're going to read an atheist, now, don't read Richard Dawkins. I know Richard Dawkins. Don't read Richard Dawkins. Go to one of the big boys. Read David Hume. That's much more, it's more, you know what you're dealing with. You know what the challenge is. Read one of the big boys. And I came away thinking, gosh, that's just so interesting, but it doesn't really make me feel less stable as a Christian. If anything, I know what I'm dealing with now. So yeah, I sort of went against wordplay of that highfalutin philosophical type back in those days. I think I can't really, I just lost my flavour for it. Not for philosophy in general, but for that type of, if A then B, which people would say mystically at the front of a classroom. Shut up. Yes, and there's also C somewhere as well if you keep looking for it. So yeah, it's not to my taste these days, but I can see why some people find it interesting. Love in action, as you were saying a minute ago from Rudolf Steiner, that certainly is to my taste these days. And yeah, what's it like in London? We've got another royal message coming from the fatso Boris Johnson tomorrow. So we're all being told basically the lockdown's going on even further. He seems to feel it's some sort of secret. Everybody knows what he's going to say. If ever there was an emperor who needs to be told he's not wearing any clothes, it's him. So they're just about to extend the lockdown again. They're just about to tell us you can't really do much. Now it's till the end of April, I think. So that's how I am, I suppose, at the moment. Looking on the bright side, the seasons are slowly changing. What is it? It's just over 30 days till the springtime. Looking forward to that and having a nice time generally. I hope you're okay, John.
Yeah, I'm fine. I just, I got plenty of exercise this week, shoveling huge piles of snow. And so it's like, you can't get away from it. And it's I think it's very telling that you have a struggle with what you designate as word play, because that's just to say something like that is very much within the realm of the analytical mind. It's fundamentally it deals in the realm of antipathy, and the struggle with the abstract idea realm is that it's a realm that is an echo from a basis of fear, from the of fear. It's the penultimate form of kidney thinking in that cold process. You have that as a mask that is actually covering anger. So when somebody goes in that direction, my first impulse is to ask them, what are they so angry about? And of course, everybody has, I'm sure, plenty of justifications to try and bring about some measure of strength through taking on the role and kicking the moneylenders out of the temple, so to speak. But that's not anger, that's wrath. That's a different thing. And Riddlestein is very clear that the wrathful impulse is something that should be left to only the higher level initiates and adepts and masters, so forth. Because if we try and be bearers of that, we'll probably just screw it up, basically. And that's my characterization. That's not what he said, of course. But it gets into this whole concept that is covered in that wonderful quote that I posted on Facebook from Ephesians 6, verses 11 through 14. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand, stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness. And so, how does that fit into the understanding that we're trying to build here? Is there's a way you can approach this that one might not expect, because see, you have getting into occult physiology, so to speak. You have a physical body, and we're all well aware of that, pretty much, although we all don't realize it's merely an echo. But in that regard, we have the physical body, and we share that. That's in commonality with the mineral kingdom on a certain level. And the next level of being is the etheric body. And that's the body of formative forces, the life body, it's sometimes called. And we share that with the realm of the plants. And then we have an astral body. And that we share with the animal kingdom, because that is something that allows something to go into motion. And you say, well, there are plants that can move. Well, that's because the astral has penetrated into like a Venus flytrap somewhat, so that it has a certain motive possibility. And then above the astral body, or that body of sympathy and antipathy, then you have the ego. And by that, I don't mean ego in the Freudian sense, but ego in the sense of Iya Asher Iya, I am the I am. That's Christ in you. And Rudolf Steiner once made the point that really the only true name of Christ is I am, and that you don't refer to Christ as him, as if it's something other, because it's the basis of esoteric Christianity is that you participate in your own inner being in that nature, although we are darkened to that understanding. And see, there's certain levels at which there's what you might call a ring pass knot. That's something that exists within the solar system and the planet, but it also exists in your supersensible vehicles. So that you see that your astral body has this kind of skin, and that skin, that barrier, is what saves your astral body from being penetrated by beings that are not from you. And as one goes through the day and one gets stressed out and experiences anger and fear and all the struggles within the emotional realm, because the emotional realm is tied into the astral body, it gets kind of frayed around the edges. And so likewise, it is acting on the etheric body, and the etheric body is getting experiencing a fatigue, and so it becomes necessary that you begin to become sleepy, so that when you go to sleep, your ego, your inner self, and the astral body leave your etheric and physical body on the bed and take off into the realm of dreams. And while that's going on, the higher beings are able to do a job repairing your vehicles for you. They do things on your behalf all the time, even though you don't know it. And so then when you come back and then you re-enter, if you do it too fast, you'll hear like almost like an explosion. That's happened to me before on numerous occasions. You get like a popping sound because you came back too quick. And maybe some of you can relate to that. I don't know, but it's an interesting phenomenon. And so you feel refreshed in the morning, and then you're prepared to meet the world, hopefully. And but Rudolf Steiner makes a point is that it's an excellent thing to consecrate your relationship through your attention before you go to sleep, and try to get into the habit of have the awareness of the manifold beings that are working on your behalf in the spiritual world. See if you can work towards having that be your first thought when you come into the world, because what that does is that gives you that seed of love. See, because remember the quote that I just read of Steiner, it has to do with taking an interest in the world. Yes, and the Luciferic, remember, the Luciferic principle is getting you to be indifferent. It's kind of the Hinayana, the lesser path, as opposed to the Mahayana, the greater vehicle versus the lesser vehicle, like in Buddhism. And in Hinayana, they're just seeking for their own liberation. In Mahayana, they're seeking the liberation of all beings. Now, in coming to Christian understanding, then you see that it's this coming into a conscious relationship with the impulses of the spiritual world that is something that we're working on. And so I could see that you might have an antipathy in being confronted with that. I'm going to give you a quick story and then pass over to you. A friend of mine, I don't even recall if I told this story before. Maybe it was on Leo Zagami's show or something like that. But I used to have a little band with this guy. Was a philosophy teacher up in Toronto. Now, I told you one story about him, but this is a different story. And when he was teaching philosophy, we got into this dialogue, and he started commenting about how the different philosophic schools confronted each other, because he was like best buddies with the head of the department and all that. And it synchronized nicely with an article that I'd seen in I believe it was the Detroit Free Press recently. And in there, it had the head of the philosophy department at the University of Michigan, and they asked him about how was it like being the head of the philosophy department. He says, well, philosophy in the modern philosophical world, they've all developed proprietary languages that are exclusive to their school of philosophy. So basically what we have is we have all these different philosophical views represented by people that can't talk to each other. And so it's like they're in philosophic silos, it's this whole idea. If you go back and you look at R. Buckminster Fuller, where he said over-specialization is killing the planet. That was his meta-analysis of what's going on, is that everything is so compartmentalized that people really don't know what other people think about things. There's this kind of a barrier. And as language skills drop, the way they have dropped so dramatically in the last 100 years, the vocabulary of people's not necessarily sufficient to be able to complete certain thoughts. Because if you don't have the words, can you actually think the thought? You could have a feeling about it. It might make you feel a certain way, but does that mean that you really are getting beneath what it's attempting to put forward? And that's the challenge, is that do we ever really understand each other? And this whole idea of love is taking interest in the world, caring enough about the world to try and figure out, okay, is that what he thinks he means? You see? And so that's the way I see it from a certain standpoint.
God, where do I begin with that one? I remember a program where Carl Jung was interviewed, and no one ever got the gag. And I'm sure the good professor, the good Dr. Jung, never really saw how you could make a gag out of it. Somebody asked him about his view of God, and he said, I don't think I know. But if you remove the pause, you get I don't think I know. So you've got to be quite careful at these little fine tunings. You've got to be a bit careful. So what's my response? I don't think you know either. So you're back at square one. I was going to make that gag. I'm in love with a bookshop, Shakespeare and Co. in Paris. I've been to Paris innumerable times. Apparently, it's under threat of closure. Shakespeare and Co. I love you. I think John Barnwell loves you too. Please keep fighting. Please keep fighting. Please keep fighting. Nobody at all wants you to close. And I want to hold the book launch of my next book with you. If it's good enough for Michael Moorcock, it's good enough for me. So please stay open. Please stay open. Please stay open. In terms of the reverb, the sort of halcyon days of the pew suddenly come to mind, and it was always you, Leo, and we all knew it. Okay, we all knew it every single week, and nobody could say it because we were on air and it was live. There we are. So, and there was someone. Remember, I never see the chat box. I never see all those comments. I still can't with all of this. I caught one by accident. David at his techie worst. So I caught something by accident where somebody said as a comment, which I managed to find in passing, I love the weekly crisis of the reverb. And I thought, oh my God, is that how it's coming across to people? So, yeah, there's that too. Oh, gosh. I hate words like master. I hate words that claim some sort of consciousness hierarchy, some sort of hierarchy in consciousness. I love the word saint. I love the word apostle. Sort of know what I'm dealing with there. Initiate, I can sort of deal with. Master, I think I've got the same worry that old fatty David Icke has with that. I mean, I disagree with him. There's no, is there such a thing as a hierarchy? On one of these weird shows he does, where he was challenging somebody else to show who was the biggest New Age guy in the room. He suddenly closed his eyes and looked upwards and said, "There we are. What hierarchy?" Well, come off it, David. Is there a hierarchy of consciousness? Yes. I go to sleep every night. I wake up in the morning. Sometimes when I'm poorly, I'm only half there. There are different levels of consciousness. There we are. That's the end. You were wrong. But I have the same trouble with him, I think, the minute the word master turns up. In what sense are you a master over me? In what sense are you claiming authority over me? That makes me very uncomfortable. If Bodhidharma wants to stride up Lexington Gardens now and give me a slap round the face, say, "Shut up, it is the way to achieve enlightenment," I'll go along with it. But failing that makes me very, very, very uneasy. The only master I tend to like is when Genie, all those years back in that comedy show, I can't remember what that he turned into J.R. Ewing in the end. I can't remember his name, in Dallas, but he had a genie, a young girl of magical powers. I think she used to call him master, although she wouldn't do it nowadays, of course, because the feminists would jump on that program like there was no tomorrow. But it was charming and it was sweet and it didn't mean anything sexist. And, her saying "yes, master" every 5 minutes was just endearing in some weird way or other. Philosophy. I suspect I take for once academia at face value, which it's getting increasingly easy to do because they're not saying anything worth listening to half the time at the moment. So it's very easy to take them at face value nowadays. Even NASA, I mean, they've suddenly admitted UFOs exist, of course. Was that this week or the one after? Unidentified aerial phenomena. You mean UFO, yeah? So they finally admitted that they're there. So all this fuss for 20 years, you were wrong then, admit it. But it reminds me of something to do with the world of philosophy. I suspect the academics are right, academia is correct, when it's saying there are basically in the West, let's remember, if you're going to the motherland of every motherland, India, and you start throwing away, and I know you know this, John, you start throwing away around words like philosophy, 15 years later, you might all know roughly what you mean by it before you can go any further. Because, there isn't anything that hasn't been studied or thought about at great depth in that culture. So I'm talking about the West, the humble West. Modern academics keep telling me there's a difference between the continental school and the Anglo-American school. I'll get my teeth back in, forgive me. Anglo-American philosophers like talking about language and its functions, and I love Wittgenstein. I think what regular viewers of this show must remember, he's my favorite atheist, if that's what he is. But isn't there more to life than just the word, the words that we use? Therefore, I tend to follow the other branch, the continental school, which, of course, the Anglo-American school is always criticizing for a lack of precision. But their precision seems to leave too much of life to one side. The word love must mean, well, yeah, so it's just a definition then, is it? Truth must mean, well, it's just a definition then, is it? And I just think we've got to be careful. I mean, the continentals are much better at sort of ideas. They're much better at insights. They're much better at grand schemes. They're much better at metaphors in all sorts of ways. And I suspect if you go down the Anglo-American route, you end up with a very fine appreciation of very little. You always get the impression with Wittgenstein that really he thinks, oh, if we could just all sort our vocabulary out, everything will be fine. Well, I mean, there's optimistic. So all we've got to do then is be slightly more eloquent, and then the world becomes a new Eden. Well, yeah, maybe. I just find that personally difficult to believe. Whereas if you're looking at one of my other heroes, of course, Gabriel Marcel, who was a friend of Jean-Paul Sartre, he was probably the clearest exponent of Christian existentialism, which has huge influence over me personally. And he's very clear that you've got to be careful not to denude human experience to such an extent that you're no longer talking about human experience. You're actually talking about a shadow of human experience, or human experience as it would be lived in a laboratory. But hey, we're not living in a laboratory. So I think we've got to be, I veer more towards that school and imaginative leaps and intuitive grasps, because after all, that's what the whole of modern physics seems to be based on: dreams and visions, as opposed to hard calculation and analysis. I mean, where would Einstein be without dreams and visions? Or Niels Bohr, or Oppenheimer, or all the rest of them? Or, of course, that great mystic and magician Isaac Newton, who somebody called recently the last true magician in British history. Look at the notebooks. He writes more about magic and the occult and theology than he does about physics. So, we've got to be careful what we think we're doing with wordplay. And I love wordplay a great deal. We've just got to be careful of that. I'm thinking of, I'll shut up after this little anecdote. Years and years ago, I had the privilege to go to the Findhorn Foundation, the Findhorn community in much more early days, 78, which dates me, doesn't it? And I think I've said on this show before, we met Dick Barton. No, not the special agent. It was just a similar name. And we were talking an RAF experimental pilot who was also a fully functional mystic. Personally, I find that a vindication of all sorts of things. Who would tell us about expansions of consciousness. We met him twice. My esoteric teacher, Jesse Thomas, wherever you are now, Jesse, I know the angels are showering you with happiness, who opened my mind to so many things that's untrue. An old army boy, so I've never had prejudice against the military, because when they're in tune with things, they're really in tune with things. And as I say, Dick Barton was an Air Force RAF. So we met him once privately, and then he came. He liked the meeting so much he came to give a talk, which he never did, about his own experiences in consciousness expansion. I noticed he was very careful to say experiences, not mechanics or methods leading to. And life being life, we never got the chance to ask him, okay, how did all this arise? Although, of course, the entire community was based, at least back then, on the writings of Alice Bailey. I don't have the usual Christian hang-up about Alice Bailey. I think she's very interesting. Will she, at the end of the day, say that salvation is only possible through Jesus Christ? No. I'm a pastor. I've got to say, at the end of the day, that is the only way you achieve liberation in the ultimate sense. But you know me, John. I never wanted to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and that struck me as something very important. Therefore, I can't denude terms, or is from all, or this from that, and hiccup from stirrup. I'll pass it back to you, John, because I think I've been monopolising my bit too much. But yeah, I get worried over wordplay taken beyond a certain point.
Yeah, you always catch me when I'm off trying to find something. Well, yeah, to get at that, again, what I started this on before we got down all these various excursions, getting back to the point, and the what is the distinction between I shall and I must. When I was involved with doing the heart research where we were able to prove scientifically that the heart is not a pump. We weren't so presumptive as to say definitively what it is, which I think was one of the best parts about our approach. But we proved that it was technically impossible for it to be a pump. And it gets into this whole idea of either or. And that whole balancing act of either or reminds me of a story that Ralph, who was the scientist that I was working with, and he was a military guy too. In fact, he was the head of the laboratory at the Tank Command here in Detroit. So he was, I believe, a G5 is what they call it here. But that's like being a colonel in the Army. But in any regard, he used to say, the things that you do when you don't have to will determine what you do when you can't help yourself. And so that kind of sums it up right there, is that whole idea is that are you freely choosing this activity, or is it a compulsion? Is it an urge, or is it just a mechanical pattern? And getting into being able to make those types of distinctions is what enables one to find a path to freedom, because it's ultimately those things that we do, and we think that we're freely living within these things, and they're too so often they're just echoes, repeating. Like, for example, colloquial phrases can be a bugbear in that regard, where you just have this automatic response. Somebody says something like, well, like here in the US, how you doing? Fine. I mean, didn't put a whole lot of thought into that. There wasn't a whole lot of warmth of soul. How you doing? Fine. It's like, that's like, and it's funny because Europeans, they're not accustomed to that. And that's part of the American lingo, how you doing? Fine. If you say how you doing to somebody in France, you better step back, because they're probably going to start telling you how they're doing, because they thought you really were asking them a question rather than just have it be like, hi. It's just merely a mechanical greeting of sorts here in the States. So language can have a lot of different realms in which it dwells. And the point that Rudolf Steiner is trying to make, one aspect of that is this whole distinction of how do you relate to the world? Is it something that you're taking it to heart, so to speak, or are you just like, you're just using reflexes? So it's where you're not engaging yourself in your own activity is the point. And that's like, I must. That can fall into that classification, because you really didn't, shall we say, give it much thought. You didn't take it to heart. And the whole issue is the developing of that, not just the concept, but the reality that God is love. That it's a reality. It's not merely some kind of philosophical construct that some clever linguist or professor of semiotics dreamt up when he was a young man, because that's when they dream up all their stuff. You're usually, most philosophical works happen to be college papers, which is interesting, because how much do people in college know? They could be very, very clever, and they're really can stand behind their mental constructs with a great deal of vigor. We see that in the world today, where it's like the young people are leading the charge, that they're going to save the world by some kind of Me Too movement or something. And so it gets away from the aspect of freedom and what we call here liberty. Liberty, of course, in the sense of that liberty is what type of government that one has is in the American idea. The purpose of that government is to protect your freedom, and that is called liberty. That they don't. It's something that's a God-given capacity, and so it behooves people to support a government that is there to protect their liberties. And so that's an interesting concept because we do live in the Michaelic age. But again, if you look into some of the deeper aspects, and I've been going back and forth as to whether to get into some of the aspects of what Rudolf Steiner has said about this, because but I think I can and frame it in a way that will be easier for people to be able to live with it. In 1879, I keep making reference to November of 1879 and the war in heaven, to where the spirits of darkness were driven to earth, and now they wish to inhabit our thinking. But the ultimate challenge there is that also in 1879, the activity of the Archangel Gabriel that helped develop in the human brain capacity an ability to be able to then be a ferment out of which could grow the forces that were to be brought into being through the activity of Michael. So it was preparatory. So you always see that there's always like this idea of the Grail, and Archangel Gabriel is very much tied into that. He's the one who makes the appearance, the Annunciation, right? And he made the Annunciation of John the Baptist, and he's very much tied into the mysteries of the blood, and that whole idea of the development of the familial relations and all of that was so key during that roughly 400 year, 350, 400 year archangelic period. And Rudolf Steiner is very clear that the archangelic period is not just some kind of mental construct, but that it's from his own personal experience, something that has to do with an actual reality of the spiritual world and the way in which it works in the guidance and the cultivation of the evolution of mankind. Is very much tied into the types of faculties that are unfolded within particular epochs. And so as we made the transition from the age of Gabriel and the age of that familial blood mystery into the age of Michael, which is the age to where we break free from that. But that there was a ability, and he said that this could be, were they be able to do an autopsy of a corpse from the 15th century and compared it to a corpse of today, they would actually see variations in the actual physical structure of the brain and the convolutions. And that there's something that was developed during the age of Gabriel that was meant to be a means of expressing what was to come forth in the age of Michael, but that people have to take it up themselves. And if they don't, it will atrophy. And if it atrophies, then that which should have been taken up by them has to be taken up by other beings of the spiritual world, because that's what they do. They take up the slack for whatever mankind never gets around to. And so that is the scheme in which you see that there's this whole development where I've talked in the past about how in the period that the old moon, it's called, before the earth existed, there were three different stages of development. And the third stage is old moon. And the beings that didn't complete their human development on Old Moon, those are the Luciferic spirits. That's the Luciferic host, if you, in the most general sense. And so in looking at that, you see there's always going to be aspects of evolution in its sevenfold, 7 stages, 3 coming to the 4th stage of the human, and then the 3 that follow, and there's others after. But it's a septenary scheme that's laid out in Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, in the work of Steiner, most detailed in outline of esoteric science, and also in the works of the Anglican occultist C.G. Harrison. And so basically, if you look at the whole idea of this hierarchical thing that you're getting at, in terms of the Rosicrucian Christian esoteric stream, that's a central understanding that if you don't understand that, you don't really know anything about initiation, because initiation has to do with the way in which the ego that is received through the agency of Christ is able to work into the astral, etheric, and then ultimately the physical. And until that happens, that development has not taken place. And so there's a transformation of the astral that becomes the spirit self. The transformation of the etheric becomes the life spirit, and then transformation of the physical becomes spirit man. Of course, these are things that in occult science are meant to follow in the 3 stages that follow after the earth is long gone. So that, as like St. Paul said, ye shall be as the angels. Well, that's when our central task will be to develop the spirit self, but it's the macrocosmic spirit self. It's not a spirit self that's received through the agency of the retarded Luciferic spirits of Old Moon. See, that's a pretty subtle distinction, and I don't know too many people that bother to point that out. You can achieve the spirit self during eth evolution, and that's somebody that is advanced in the rest of mankind. But the proper principle for it to be developed, that's the future Jupiter evolution. There's Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan are the 3 following stages. I don't want to get too technical, but you can't get there unless you have a framework for understanding. So you see that there's this 4-fold drama of Saturn, Sun, Moon, and then Earth. That's the 4th. And then Jupiter, Venus, Vulcan. So that's the 7 great mysteries, which I deal with in my 2nd book. And that's your 3 degrees that you always hear about. The brother of the 3rd degree. What does that mean? Well, that has to do with that. And the 4th stage, the royal arc, it has to do with the mystery of being able to exist outside of the body. That's what they're getting at. And in Cagliostro's approach to the rites of Egyptian Freemasonry, as he called it, it has to do with the mystery of the pentagram itself. And of course, that's that principle that dwells beyond this realm, beyond the 4 elements, that akasha or spirit aspect. There's a lot of different mnemonic systems that point towards this understanding, but that's basically what we're dealing with here. And so, yes, it is hierarchical because that's the way it is in terms of genuine occult science. And so consequently, when you see people that try to approach these things and they don't know that they're not going to be able to get very far. And I don't mean to be dogmatic, but I have to be dogmatic about certain things.
Thank you, Torquemada, for choosing not to be dogmatic. No, I'm not against the notions of hierarchy per se. It's just I tend to think hierarchies are internal, and on the inner planes, if they're seeking legitimacy and they're seeking authority and they're seeking reality. Just remember, I did not grow up in a democracy. I grew up in a monarchy, a parliamentary monarchy. And just because some kid tells me to do as I'm told, it doesn't mean I'm going to. You Americans are far too spoilt for choice. That's the trouble. And that's why the sheer horror of hierarchies never strikes you. You know, what was it? The Duke of Westminster, the old, not this kid who's just taken everything. You know, he was so rich, and Duke of Westminster Senior, he physically couldn't have lived long enough to count all his cash. You know, so no, if he tells me to get out the way, he'll get a bunch of fives. No, I mean, it depends what you mean by hierarchy. And the modern generation wouldn't say that. You know, yes, yes, my lord, yes, my lord. So it depends what you mean by hierarchy. It depends on what basis and the ontology and the philosophical grounding and all yada yada yada. It depends what you're actually talking about. As I did say a minute ago, I rather like the idea, and I rather welcome the concept of an initiate. I find that very comfortable in a way I don't find the word master uncomfortable. I mean, there are a couple of things that caught me in your last talk. I mean, certainly there's a lot of discussion from the tiny bit I know of the occult schools of when it's the Gabriel energy and when it's the Michael energy at work. I know there's been a lot of discussion. I'm way out of my depth with that. You know, when is it the messenger and when is it the chief warrior? And I know there's a lot of discussion that goes on about that. Therefore, I tend to leave that to the side until I sort of know my ground a bit better, or someone could give me a very convincing argument, which I'm always open to. In terms of masters, I mean, you know, Hinayana Theravadin, I can sort of see them as masters. You know, I meant to like the great vehicle which you mentioned, you know, smells and bells and statues and arms reaching out in salvation everywhere and all these gorgeous vestments. Yeah, so I'm meant to be at home, and it is beautiful. But I don't know, you can't help feeling these hard nut Theravadin boys are really onto something. You know, I'm going to master myself and discipline my life until I achieve some type of expanded consciousness. I can see how that fits very nicely. You know, until I meet Christ, I am going to discipline myself in a very, very rigid way. All that makes great sense to me. And you know, and remember, I'm a Zen boy in disguise. I'm a Zen boy in disguise. I love all this willful and beautiful austerity. So, you know, I had a British Sunday roast earlier, so I don't know. You know, there's a little bit of hypocrisy in saying that. Which, if people see me erupting, yes, belching, that's what I'm doing. I'm sorry, because I had it a bit later than usual. I should have eaten it early with either half of my brother, so that was nice. Oh, why do I not dismiss the notions of hierarchy? The libertarian in me would love to, but I can't entirely, because one of the other philosophical heroes I have, who ironically, and it's real life, he completely destroys what I was saying a minute ago, is of course Berkeley, who, even though he was very much a member of the Anglo-American school, for me, he speaks like a continental. Bishop Berkeley, of course, people mustn't forget that. He was a clergyman. I mean, did he say anything that he would have thought wasn't what a Christian would have said? I doubt it. Was he really just answering the empiricists as a Christian? I suspect there's something going on there. You know, he posits immaterialism to their endless experiences. And of course, the importance of Berkeley in the history of philosophy is that he turns the weapons of the empiricists and the rationalists on themselves and manages to destroy them. So that's no mean feat in anybody's book. You know, all this subjective idealism, I think that's where you get all these hierarchies and all these masters suddenly reappearing, but in a very comprehensible and, dare I say, even more sacred form. Because all of a sudden we know what we're dealing with. You know, it's not just some economically niched swine who's telling us all that he's in charge of it all. You know, I'm going to lord it over you because my family owns a castle. You know, sod off, sod off. You know, if you meet a master on the inner planes, then that's, I think, entirely different from meeting some guy telling you he's a master who lives down the road. I think that's entirely different. And if we're looking at subjective idealism as an example, all of a sudden, all the writings of the Blavatskys, all the writings of the Steiners have this wonderful continuity to them, which they didn't before. If you're looking at one scholar versus another scholar, I mean, my trouble with the world of philosophy is they have to reinvent the wheel every time a new genius comes along. So, you know, someone was saying something ridiculous a couple of years ago. It's either Aristotle or Nietzsche. Why? 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 I mean, what they were getting at, of course, is that Aristotle starts in one place and Nietzsche starts in completely a different place. And therefore, that's the trouble with the whole of philosophy. Somebody begins here, somebody else begins there, and it probably takes you a lifetime to work out how the language and the symbol system used by a particular scholar actually relates to another scholar, let alone the tradition. I mean, that might take more than one lifetime. So if all of a sudden you're looking at the lovely little Berkeley, you know, if a tree falls in the wood and nobody's there, does it really fall in the wood? The quadrangle at my university, does it really exist when I'm not in the quadrangle? Oh, yes, it does, because God is there. You know, oh, God. Yeah, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? But, you know, if you're looking at that approach, all of a sudden, all of this stuff, the esoteric in particular, it's not simply one opinion amongst other opinions, which is the opinion and the outlook of the modern world. All of a sudden, it's a continuity of exploration. And then I think you're looking at an incredible challenge to the hard sciences, the natural sciences, not to undermine them. They have a rightful place too. You know, science makes an awful religion. I suspect religion makes an awful type of science. But, you know, maybe they've both got different functions and they're working in different ways and they're both parts of being human. And the minute we start looking at the subjective idealism, as I say, we see something we hadn't seen before. And all of a sudden, all of those terms become workable, meaningful, and exceedingly profound. I'll hand back to you, John.
Well, yeah. I mean, you could say the Aristotelian works from the particular to the general, whereas a Platonist would work from the general to the particular. And as for Nietzsche, just a phenomenal individual who had a very unfortunate demise, and it seeped into his later writings as he succumbed to his syphilitic condition. And we've discussed that before, where Elizabeth Forster Nietzsche's sister, asked Rudolf Steiner to be the editor of Friedrich Nietzsche's works, and he said he would only do it if he could make notations in the margins of things that Nietzsche had written when he was ill and things he wrote when he was in a healthy frame of mind. And so there is that, and it's an objective lesson, because what we're looking at there is that through his inability to maintain that skin that we call it, like the skin that surrounds the astral body and the skin that surrounds the etheric body and all that actually acts as a shield and protects you from other beings that have no rightful place in taking the driver's seat, so to speak, of your vehicle. and through illness, Nietzsche had succumbed to the influence of these Ahrimanic beings, literally dictating through inclination some of his later writings. And then, of course, some of it is also the editorial insertions of his sister, who was just a far darker figure than Nietzsche. Nietzsche himself was in many regards to be admired for his honesty. He's one of the few people that really did tell people what he actually thought. It's just that ultimately he had a tragic ending. But I really think that one of the greatest works of philosophy in my mind is The Birth of Tragedy, which is really one of his earliest things, and that's where he was able to get into what is the thematic of the Grecian world of ideas, and the difference between the Dionysic soul and the Apollonian soul. And so there's that whole different tendency. It's fascinating stuff. And but that he was a figure that Rudolf Steiner greatly admired. But in Rudolf Steiner's autobiography, he describes going to see Nietzsche, and who was, literally unconscious, sitting there in his chair with that fantastic mustache. Although he didn't comment on the mustache, but yeah. So Rudolf Steiner wrote the book Friedrich Nietzsche, Fighter for Freedom, as it's translated into English, and that's a very, very interesting read that doesn't get mentioned very often. That's interesting because not too many people take up the challenge that is in many ways very, very central in the work of Rudolf Steiner, is like his Riddles of Philosophy, to where he gives very succinct characterizations of the philosophers throughout history, and also his work on Nietzsche. His work with Goethe was primarily from a scientific viewpoint, but whenever one approaches Goethe, you can't ignore the fact that he is at the core of the German approach to philosophy, which is, if it isn't poetic, then it isn't true. And Goethe, he's somebody I've been spending a lot of time on myself personally, because I like the openness. He was, for example, he was against nationalism, and which today it's interesting because everybody's talking, oh, he's a national. They use these kind of mimetic characterizations, and they never bothered to say, ask, what do you mean by that? Because when somebody says that, they want to do something good for their country, okay, that's fine, but that's not like against that. You're not against other nations. They should be for their country. Everybody should be trying to do the best for their local communities, and that's the wholesome impulses we're talking about. But if people aren't aware, but that Goethe was quite a fan of. I'm getting a call from Texas, but that he was a fan of Napoleon, what Napoleon was trying to do, but then he became disillusioned with it, like many people did. And so it's interesting that you could see the growth and development of Goethe revealed in his work, and since he lived so long, that you could really see the different cast of mind, such as in his early, the first part of Faust, when he was written when he was a young man, and then the second part, toward the end of his life, he ended up writing it over a very long period of time. So you see his maturity of thought and the completely different cast of mind in which he approached it. And so it's, I think, really good to try again get behind what people think that they mean. And I think that Bishop Barclay, as you guys call him, of course here we call him Berkeley, and so in case anybody's wondering who's he talking about, Berkeley, yeah. It's, for whatever reason, the Brits like to say Barclay, and but then again, I can't tell you how often that I stumble on Worcestershire. I like Worcestershire sauce, but if you ask for the Worcestershire sauce from a Brit, they'll look at you like, what are you talking about? I Dream of Jeannie, that's what you were talking about. Barbara Eden. Yeah, in fact, that was at a British pub at the entrance of Laurel Canyon. It's called the Cat and the Fiddle. And it had the butcher block benches and the slow running taps of the warm beer and dartboards and all of that, and wood chunks on the floor and all that. And I ran into Barbara Eden there. What a lovely woman. And but she was I Dream of Jeannie. Yeah, that's the show you're trying to think of. That's pretty funny. Yeah, back then it was acceptable for her to say yes, master. So it depends on what you mean by master, and it's not a word that I would use lightly because within the tradition itself, while it is a very real thing, keep in mind they too have a sense of humor. But that being said, speaking of sense of humor, with Reverend David William Parry, he's the author of The Grammar of Witchcraft. And it's not a study of witchcraft, it's a Shakespearean study. And he's also the author of Caliban's Redemption, his Shakespearean-esque poetry. And his principal work is Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts. And that's edited by the talented Daniela Irendust. And these are all available on Amazon, and they're wonderful books. And for myself, I have my first book, which is a big, thick book of some 640 pages, The Arcana of the Grail Angel, the Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Motherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order, with text and diagrams. And the sequel to that is The Arcana of Light on the Path, which is more of a meditative tool. And included in them are an extensive series of diagrams that lay out the various facets of the cosmological concepts that I use in our talks here. And they are available on eBay, although I've had trouble with those links in posting them on Facebook for whatever reason. Facebook isn't letting that work. So you just go to my link for the academia link where it says to my books, and you click on that, and then you can get to the eBay links that will take you to them listed. Because if I found that if you just clicked on the eBay link below my Facebook, it would go to there's no such link. So they're playing games with things they're blocking. It seems as though that's what they spend most of their time doing is denial of service to various types of things. So in any regards, you can get to that. And in fact, we were talking the other day about Rennie Corrido, who wrote The Golden Age of Shark, The Teachings of a Mystery School, and The Eternal Feminine. And I'd forgotten last week, but he did do a review on my first book. He said it's undoubtedly a major work. One might even call it a compendium. A fine reference work, it will serve a valuable purpose. So that's from Rennie Corrido, who was the direct student of Walter Johannes Stein, the noted Grail researcher and the mentor of one of my mentors, Werner Glass. And so it's working within that tradition that I'm striving to do. And a lot of the questions that you have, David, could be answered in my book, actually. But I know you're busy. Let's see here now. How much time? Oh, we got some time. We got another 15 minutes or so. So in any regard, if you want to do that, you can find his books on Amazon and my books through my academia link below Facebook or below the YouTube. And if you want to buy us a cup of coffee, which would be really nice, you can go to paypal.me/dparry777 for Reverend David. That's DPARRY777. And for me, paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And of course, links for that are posted below the Facebook and the YouTube entries. And so that being said, I think that somebody's asking me to look at the chat. Hey, wise old man, do you ever say anything besides LOL? Yeah, that's a good one. But I want to thank the people that have taken up the task, which really is a task, to study my works. And that's coming from Austria and Poland and the UK and Wales and the Netherlands and Israel and Italy and Canada. So I'm getting some international exposure, and that's a good thing. And I hope that you're getting the same, David, because I think your principal work especially is just it's a gem.
Oh, thank you, John. It was a bit of work, I confess that. Oh, but I love distant differences in American and British pronunciation. Wasn't that old Fred Astaire number? You say tomato and I say tomato. You say potato and I say tomato. Oh, I love all that. Whether I'm right, whether I'm wrong. A nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. Oh, isn't it lovely, all of that? No, vive la différence. Vive la différence. I think that makes these things magical exchanges in every sense of the word. I know I promised to read your books at Christmas. That may have been a misjudgment on my part. A pastor and Christmas never make promises at Christmas. However, it is on my list of Easter reading for the simple reason we won't be at church all the time this Easter. So I might as well be more meditative and reading my friends and your wonderful books. I have skimmed whole sections. Those diagrams are bewildering. They're amazing, but bewildering. Therefore, yes, I've got to read the text to actually get into it properly, and I will. I look forward to it. I'm very proud of my anthroposophical resurgence and having you as a friend and colleague in it all. And yeah, I mean, I want to sort of get to grips with it this time in a way I didn't last time. I think one of the links that I'm sensing in Steiner, I think there's an anthroposophy. I'm certain there's an anthroposophy behind Swedenborg, and the fact that anthroposophy is the main vehicle of engineering spiritual truth for Steiner. I'm seeing that sort of continuity I was sort of referring to a minute ago, and since I think I've gone as far for the time being without, oh god, this will sound awful, because you get to a certain point where it just needs to digest for a while. I think I've gone as far as I can with Swedenborg for the time being. It just needs to digest. I can't, otherwise it's eating too much and you then become ill. You don't become nourished. So I need a different viewpoint. I need a different vantage point, which I'm absolutely convinced Rudolf Steiner will give me. I mean, I did read things like Knowledge of the High Worlds, How Is It Achieved in the Past, The Philosophy of Freedom, and so on. All of those books were stolen. I had lots of my books stolen through the years. Thank you, everyone. So I'm trying desperately to get them back because they were hardcover. That's more difficult to get. So yeah, I want them back, and but this time I want to be more meditative because I think I'm sort of more on top of where I'm going with all this than I was in the past. So I've no doubt I will find an excellent guide in your good self. Oh gosh, anthroposophy strikes me as the Western. I'm going to put my neck on the block here as the Western mystery tradition. I seem to remember reading somewhere along the time, and I love the writings of Blavatsky. This is where the Bible Belt starts sending me death notes. Yes, I'm sorry. I do think the works of Blavatsky are fascinating. I didn't say I believed in all of it or went along with all of it, but yes, they are fascinating. You've got to have a bloody closed mind not to realize how fascinating they are. And in fact, excuse me, our forthcoming Nephilim Anthropology Conference, it's basically been given to me to talk about that, which I didn't really want to do, but I'll have to say something about Blavatsky and giants and what she thought of all of that, because I've sort of been forced into it. Not where I'm coming from. I seem to remember one of the reasons Steiner left the Theosophical Society in Berlin was he felt that they focused far too much on the mysteries of the Orient, on the mysteries of the East, and him saying something along the lines, and you'll know this much better than me, John, that, we had at least an equal tradition, at least an equal path, which I've never doubted. I've absolutely never doubted that. There isn't anything known on the shores of the Indus which wasn't known to Oni, the circle drawer, in Palestine, in Israel. There is nothing those slick boys in India know that we haven't also discovered. No one can tell me the Druids weren't as deeply into prayer. And where are they when you need them? If ever Britain needed a legalistic group of scholars and priests to turn up, where are they? Bloody where you need them, all on holiday as usual. So yeah, I mean, that has to come back, I think. And also the real inner core, the marrow of Christianity needs to resurge now. And that's why you need to look at things like Gnosticism and anthroposophy, because the churches have done their best to stifle that. Exoteric churches. I remember reading one thing. Oh, this will right. I don't hate you, Bible Belt. There was one hoo-ha I followed about a year ago, where some woman in some church. I'm deliberately being vague here. She bought an adult colouring book. Love, don't colour books like kids. Read a book. Read a book. Yeah. Anyway, she bought an adult colouring book, and someone had accused her of heresy. You're absolutely kidding. Because one of these designs looked a bit, I'm quoting, looked a bit like a mandala. What, you mean it's circular? There's a bit of a difference between a mandala and something that's just a circle. Circles are everywhere in nature. And then I noticed her friends and supporters rise to the barricades. She loves Jesus, and she was just colouring a book. For God's sake, is this really what Christians have been reduced to? When we've got the preeminent intellectual tradition, I would argue, on the planet. Let's not throw away the baby with the bathwater. Let's not throw away the fact there are different points of view in Christianity, and maybe more than one is valid. Your little church may think one thing, but it doesn't mean the rest of us are going to hell. Live with it. Maybe in my Father's house there are many mansions. Hey, that's what the mouthpiece himself said. I think Steiner is this resource, this vast resource that needs revisiting. I was looking, but you are having too much of an influence on me. I was looking at the architecture and the sculptures during the week. I'm trying to get back all of those books that were lifted from my study area. But no, I mean, that is a man on fire with art and creativity. And yeah, I think if people don't think they can learn anything from anthroposophy. Maybe they just need to broaden their horizons a bit, and maybe there's great and profound depth to the Christian tradition, and we have nothing to be ashamed of. Before I hand back to you, because I'm worried about the time. My prayers go to people in Texas. Like everybody else over here, we've been looking at the looks of devastation. The looks there, the pictures, the photos of devastation, absolutely unbelievable. Someone told me that Ted Cruz had decided to go on holiday at this particular time. That makes no sense to me at all. I mean, isn't he meant to be in charge of the whole thing? So that's something that reminds me of British politicians. Very interesting. And also my prayers go to friends in Saudi Arabia who are also being snowed in at the moment. Who was it said a couple of years ago they wouldn't believe in global warming until Texas froze over? Right, so where does that put us all now? But yeah, I think it's come as a shock in Saudi Arabia. I was sent some images of camels trying to weather the snowdrifts, and it actually was deeply disturbing. Anyway, on that weird meandering note, I'll hand back to you, John, because I'm paranoid about the time.
Yeah. Well, when they start screwing around with technology in the upper atmosphere, it plays havoc on the jet stream, and it could allow a sweeping down of weather systems into areas that they would never even come close to approaching. And so it's just very disturbing to me that they think that they can just get into this great experiment just because some guy found it interesting. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. It's like, oh, look what I can do. Well, great. Stop that. And so, yeah, we still get all this weather modification that they used to deny, but now what Brennan, former head of the CIA, was bragging about it in one of his talks about their ability to control the weather, and so that just it's par for the course. These people with all of their secret projects regarding secret agendas, and it's all compartmentalized, and you have to be read in to find out about it. And I agree with Castro and Austin Fitz is that the most expensive thing on the planet is secrecy, and that they're blowing all our money trying to maintain secrecy on programs so that they can have power. And we've addressed a little bit of the Luciferic temptation of being aloof from the world, but we mustn't forget the Ahrimanic temptation of wanting the power to control others. And those are the two challenges that we're working with that are directly against our quest here, which is the free quest for truth. And by the way, I forgot to mention with my books is that if you are outside the US, well, I only do the eBay thing here in the US, so you can contact me directly, either through a private message on Facebook, or you can also send me a private message through my academia website, and that way you'd be able to get a hold of me, and I can work out arrangements with you. And so that being said, I think we've pretty much covered it at this point, so that we know that on a certain level, we have to be able to be at peace with all this stuff that's going on, and then do everything you can in what little way that you might be able to, but nonetheless to be able to have the equanimity, to be able to not lose your balance, because it's losing your balance that frays the edges of that sphere, that dynamic sphere that is protecting you from foreign influences. And so, that being said, so much could be brought forward in that regard, but we don't have time to do it today. But I would like to get Reverend David to share with us a prayer that he could consecrate this, our regular Sunday meeting.
Oh, gosh, I mean, yeah, I'll just say one thing quickly. I promise never to have the last word. That's not what I want. There's one conspiracy theory, and you're to blame because you reminded me. One conspiracy theory I am beginning, sadly, to take a lot more seriously, and that's chemtrails. I had a long discussion with someone about a couple of weeks ago over Facebook, curiously, who was saying the most worrying things imaginable. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, all of this actually does make sense. People forget what the atmosphere was like back in the early 70s, late 60s, where a certain type of science could conquer everything. And I imagine that attitude was abused a great deal. So if I'm thinking of holding a conference in 2022, maybe it will be about chemtrails, because that really does interest me. And then police can raid the building and we'll all know where we stand. There we are. My friends, my dear friend John, listeners, viewers, we've got to remember that the poets tell us repeatedly that it's always darkest before the dawn. And is in this time of environmental upheaval, no matter what the cause, this time of personal upheaval due to ever restrictive social and cultural conditions, this time when we're forced into corners and we feel that we can't really escape the circumstances that we're caught within. Let's all remember that every single man, woman, and child on this earth may be stained by sin, but is still a sanctified, holy, and great child of God. And that can't be removed from any of us. Let the dark powers do their worst, because the light ultimately will shine in all of our hearts and minds and bodies. And that is when the kingdom will come. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you much, Reverend David, and thank you for all our observers, listeners, however you're taking this up. And I hope to see you all again next Sunday.